underneath that umbrella. All right, let me redo that. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kyle Nelson, and I am here with my colleagues, Kyle Bernier and Paul Tonden from Strategic Education University, Incorporated. And specifically, Kyle and I are coaches from Capella University, while Paul is representing one of the HR teams here at SEI. It's a pleasure to have you all here and in this presentation on how to build a learning and development culture. So just to kind of give you a rundown of what to really expect for today, this is going to be more of a conversation around, like, if you're interested in building a learning and development culture, what a good first try looks like when it comes to like defining what that learning and development culture looks like, as well as kind of giving you an idea of what our first try was, which was developing a formal professional development week for our employees, and the efforts to help them grow in their professional way, and help them own their professional journeys here at Strategic Education Incorporated. So just to kind of give you an idea about how this conversation came together, I had a colleague that I've been working with. Her name was Amber. She got me from the Minnesota Organizational Development Network. She got me in touch with the wonderful Lakshmi, who I can see is here on the call today, and the three of us, after an introductory conversation, came together and we wanted to bring together a really good presentation about something that would really hopefully fill some needs in the world of learning and development. So after doing this phenomenal big picture project, organizational wide project with Paul and Kyle, I thought this would be a fabulous way to share with all of you just our try, and hopefully you all get something out of the conversation today and can go back to your organizations and think about different ways and how you can try building a professional development culture through the things we're going through today. Thank you so much for your time. Kyle, Paul, anything to add or anything that I missed before we dive into it?
No, you did a great job, Kyle. I just want to reiterate, I'm so excited that all of you are here, and please have some questions at the end. As Kyle mentioned, we'd love to have some back and forth, and yeah, stay tuned.
Yeah, nothing to add. Thank you very much, Kyle. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your days to think about the importance of learning and development in the workspace.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, good. And going right into it, we just kind of want to get into one of our first question of the day, which is, and feel free to put this in the chat and we'll take a look at it, is in 5 words or less, what does learning and development mean to you? Oh no.
Thank you, Kate. We have a chat here. So Kate mentioned innovation, renewal, and sustainable culture. Absolutely.
And happiness mentions it means advancing, growing, and building in yourself. And one more we have gaining and building on knowledge. Building constantly.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone, for volunteering those different definitions of learning and development. I see there's one more of growth mindset. Absolutely. And we'll be talking about all of these sort of moving forward, but it's always fascinating just hearing, what does this really mean to you? Because it is on an individual level, what these loaded words, learning and development, really mean. So thank you. Thank you for volunteering those. All right, so moving forward, I know we've already sort of introduced ourselves, but just to give another quick introduction. So I'm Kyle. Bernier. There's two Kyles. It's a little confusing, but I'm a senior academic coach. Also one of the co-leaders of the professional development task force at Capella University. I'm also a trained therapist and I guess very passionate mental health advocate, as well as the author of Lazy Creativity.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kyle. And I'm Paul Tonden. I am at Strategic Education on the HR Talent Development team. My role is a senior learning and development consultant. So I do internal consultations with our leaders and our employees to establish a healthy and vibrant workplace culture where employees love coming to work. And as a learning organization where we enable learning for the greater economic and career mobility of our students and learners, we also turn that internally up for our employees. And so I spend a lot of time doing that in addition to doing coaching outside of the organization as well. Glad to be here.
And certainly last but not least, my name is Kyle Nelson. I'm also a senior academic coach at Capella University. I work specifically with our master's and PhD psychology programs in the hopes of trying to help better our learners in the mental health space and the organizational psychology space. And outside of the walls of Capella, I'm an organizational development consultant where I help organizations solve sticky business problems and contend with the dynamic realities of trying to create better organizations. All right. So in terms of the agenda today, the biggest things of what we'll want to go over with today is what you need to know and why does this matter and what you're hoping to get out of it. I know that one of the big things to do is not necessarily read off the slides, but I thought it was important in this. I thought it was important in this specific space because the biggest things that we want to ensure that we're doing is ensuring for creating value for your conversations is how what you all need to know in order to create potentially a professional development week of your own, or go off into the learning and development space and create your first big try, so that you can feel confident, either feel confident doing that or get some roadblock tips on how to initiate something like that we did over at Strategic Education Incorporated. And why does this matter? Learning and development is an absolute necessity for when it comes to organizational growth and being the learning part of the organization. This was a fabulous opportunity to get to really bring this into a formalized space and really get the opportunity to really bring this to life. So hopefully what you can all get out of is for your own personal learning and development and growth, so that all of you can go back to your organizations with new learnings and new takeaways to really grow from this presentation.
So how we got here is we had a problem to solve, and that was at our enterprise, we had a merger that took place. We had an acquisition. We're a growing organization. We've got different orgs with different cultures across the organization. And just to get really clear on what we're talking about and defining workplace culture, it really is about both the formal and informal standards of the way we show up and the way we do things. And it is a critical piece of understanding and defining the culture that an organization has and the aspirations of what we want the culture to be, and to make that be the work that we do in the middle to work towards that. And so the culture that we want is a continuous learning culture. As I had mentioned before, we're an educational enablement organization, and we're very focused on education being a differentiator and being something that can help lift folks up and move them forward in their careers and economic mobility. And with that, one of the things that we realized was that among all of the cultures, one of the common denominators that we found in the learning and development space, in that continuous learning zone around that behavior, was that there was a lot of whether we call it dysfunctional belief or other types of problematic thinking, that there's not enough time to include learning and development in a work day. And there's a permission element where if employees don't feel like they have the permission to do that learning, to have that growth mindset, and they're only supposed to be performing the tasks and performing the things that they know how to do, that's going to be problematic for a culture that values innovation and thinking outside the box and building a culture of learning and development and growth. And the great things that you all put into the chat, like growth mindset, and continuous improvement, even innovation, right? As an organization that really leans into and is focused on innovation, you can't really innovate or find new ways of doing things if you're entrenched in the old ways of doing things, right? So if we want to develop a culture where growth and growth mindset and innovation are important, then we've got to lean into continuous learning. So how do we figure out how to build that shift that belief that there's not enough time and there's not permission for the organization? Well, we lean into what is called design thinking. At least we started with design thinking. I don't know if any of you have heard of design thinking out of Stanford, or a Designing Your Life book and course that we run at Strategic Education. And it starts with 6 main principles. The first one is to be curious, then try stuff, then reframe problems, know it's a process, ask for help, and then tell your story. And that's the process that we use. That's the format or the framework that we use in thinking about how to get about figuring out how to have a learning and development culture, a culture where learning and continuous learning and improvement is an important part of the work that's being done. It's not just executing the work that we already know that we need to do and the work that has to be done, but to really lean into making sure that on the job, in the moment, there's learning, there's growth, there's development that's happening, and that we really allow for that permission and that time for folks in the organization to learn and to grow. And so we got curious about what is the culture and how do we go after that. And then we get into trying things, which we'll get into in a little bit. As Kyle Nelson said earlier, this presentation is mostly about our big try, our initial try, how we came about starting to build this culture and to work towards this aspirational idea of a continuous learning culture across the organization. But first, I think that Kyle is going to take us through why this is important. So like, why does it even matter? I just talked a little bit about how it's important for innovation and for creativity and not getting entrenched and not being like a blockbuster video and losing everything because we just only did what we knew and we weren't open to other ideas. And so I think it's really important before we get into the how and the what of what we did to really lean into why is this important. So Kyle, can you take us through a little bit on some of the research behind why a learning and development culture is important?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Paul. So I just want to segue off what Paul wonderfully introduced to us as kind of the reason for us creating this try. And I just want to emphasize, this is our try. This is our attempt to do this, but I encourage all of you to come up with your own why. And that starts with just figuring out, what is your company's success behavior? What is your company's mission? Everyone here could probably list off a dozen reasons why building a learning and development culture is so important for just continued growth and innovation. So one good place to start is with your company's success behaviors. Chances are your company values learning and development, and you probably have a whole list of reasons why this means so much to your company. And I mentioned that as a good starting point because that's where we started. we looked at our success behaviors and asked, how could we embody them and push them even further? And by taking those behaviors, those success behaviors, you can ensure that, number one, the work that you're doing aligns with your organization's principles and mission. But number two, that people are excited about it. People are embodying, learning and development in a way that is true to the organization and true to the people who are going to benefit from it most. So one question to ask is just, why does your organization exist? Another question would be, whom does it serve? How does building a learning and development culture benefit the people that you work with? And that could be, user-facing or users. It could be user-facing teams. It really comes down to these different tiers. And we always go back to this quote of, questions around the methods are many, but the principles are few. There are so many different ways that you can go about building a learning and development culture, but chances are the principles for why that's important, those are few. So what are your organization's principles? What is your organization's mission? And why is this so important? So as Paul and Kyle mentioned, we work for SEI, which is a parent company. We're an education organization. So learning and development is so critical for us because it's built into that core, our core values of innovation, development, building a growth mindset, continuous learning. The principles that we have are also the values that we hold and the values that we hope that our users, which happen to be learners, we hope that they see that as well. So when we break down the why for our organization, we notice many different silos with professional development, learning and development. And this was our attempt, our try to connect them. Now moving on to a little bit more in-depth research with Kyle.
All right, so getting right into the research. So just to kind of give you all some of my background, I have my background in organizational development and IO psychology. And so with the research that comes with this space, the field of organizational culture and organizational development and it's still very new in the space of trying to figure everything out when it comes to developing a good culture. And so one of the reasons why we want, and you can change the slide as well, Teju. So in terms of what we're looking at and some of our background at SEI that we use in order to bring into the space of the work that we do for learning and development, a lot of what we come from is in the growth mindset work of Carol Dweck. And Carol Dweck, if for those that don't know, is the actual pioneer of the growth mindset. And so with the growth mindset and the learning and development and trying to integrate that into a culture, it looks very different from I'm sure a lot of you may have experienced or aware it's very different from a more hierarchical top-down structure where it's about doing what the leadership says and not really exploring or trying risks or taking different avenues to really try something new and different. It's about embracing the differences. It's about embracing the fact that we don't know. It's embracing the problem solving that it's going to come from trial and error. So the research behind that really shows that when organizations lead into those types of mindsets, they're creating a new reality, because no longer are they stuck in the reality of this what they thought to be a tried and true model, but now they're being moved into a space where they have to try something new, they have to try something different, and that they have to bring in something that they didn't have before, which takes risk. It takes risk and an honest assessment of where you're at and where you want to go, and assessing of whether or not you're meeting those needs. So that's how we operate. That's how we operate on an organizational level at SCI in terms of integrating that growth mindset, and trying to really walk the walk of behind that research. There's also some additional fabulous researchers and authors by the name of Dan Pink, Brene Brown, John Amaechi, John Amaechi being one of my favorite organizational psychologists. They do a lot of work around centering how we can make leadership further integrated with these concepts on how to integrate a growth mindset into an organization. And really what grew us and more into the why is we also did some internal research. So before we actually began the professional development week, before it was even an idea, Kyle and I had the luxury of being able to sit down and send out a survey to our fellow advisors, and specifically at Capella University, and we reached out to our colleagues in advising, and we wanted to know like what was truly on their minds in terms of what are some big sticky problems that they wanted to help solve, or how could we not only define what professional development looked like, but what can we do to like make it like a form, like what can we do to care about it enough so that it's on the top of mind as the organization, and what can we do to really give permission for that to grow. And from that internal research, we got a lot of feedback saying that not only was it I'm sure to no one's surprise, like not only was it a top of mind concern for a lot of people, but I think one of the underlying pieces that really gave us impetus to action and helped us grow in terms of trying to develop this in the first place was seeing that people didn't really know where to begin. Like what we didn't expect to see was this to feel so big and so outside of themselves, and yet so personal at the same time, that we would be paralyzed, that we would get a sense that people felt paralyzed with an action. So that's where we wanted to take a compassionate first step and say, like, what can we do to provide them with an opportunity to really get the ball rolling, and what can we do to help them get started. And so that's what really led us into knowing more, into learning more about our audience and what we could do to actually take it from there. So, and Kyle has some more information about how we got to know our audience in this space. So Tasia, you can go ahead and move the slide.
Absolutely. So research is so key. We have to listen to it. It informs our work. But all of the research in the world doesn't make as much of an impact as hearing it from our direct audience. So that's where we really wanted to start. To Kyle's point, we sent out a survey to figure out, okay, what are people actually looking for? What are the people who we work with on a daily basis? What matters to them? And that was really our impetus and our driving force. And what we found was that the people that we were working with, this mattered to them. They wanted to learn, they wanted to develop, but the common answer we got was, I don't know where to start. I just don't know how to get started with this. This feels so overwhelming. So we started at, I don't know, and kind of built it from there. So as I mentioned a minute ago, there were a lot of these different silos, a lot of these different grassroots initiatives that were focusing on professional development, learning and development, and more or less all trying to do the same thing, but there was no consolidation. So part of our work and knowing our audience was connecting these different grassroots initiatives, bringing people together, bringing these big ideas together in a way that would unify and create some hype, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. And that, Kyle and I, as I mentioned, we co-lead the professional development task force. So we really took that team and the work that we were doing with that team as kind of a launching point. We spoke with our colleagues, tried to understand, okay, in this small sample size, what really matters to people, and people had different levels of investment in learning and development. And what we found is that people were really looking for a framework to work from. People were asking for structure and guidance, and that's what we built off of.
Yes, and that took us to why this is important. Why is it important to have a learning and development culture? Because it prioritizes, and we can go to the next slide. It prioritizes doing this work in our culture, and it meets the needs of those that we serve. right? So using our design thinking framework, once again, we got curious and we asked questions. Why, what is it that you're interested in? What is it that is keeping you from this? We see the research tells us that this is important. So what's stopping us, right? And so we respond to their needs. We got curious, we asked questions, we reframed their problems, knowing that it's a process. Then we get into, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to try? So our big ideas on the next slide: build a professional development week. This was our big idea. This was our try. Because you have to try stuff in order to make things work. If you just sit on your hands, nothing's going to happen. It's easy to get wrapped up in the busy work and the ambiguity of the world. And yeah, can we go to the next slide, please, Station? Thank you. So one way to take action was to get everyone's attention, right? And so we just literally said out loud, let's have a professional development week. Let's talk about this. Let's figure out what that looks like, and build it, make it happen. We're gonna, and rather than respond to, can you just tell me what to do, which Kyle just talked about, we reframed that problem too and said, this is not necessarily an organizational mandate. It's more of a statement, a stake in the ground, a line in the sand of how we as an organization want to show up. The culture that we want is to partner with employees who own their own development. And so making their needs known, keeping the organization accountable to providing the best possible environment. We chose to say, we are going to do a professional development week. And not only is that just a week where professional development happens, what it is it creates that permission and the showing that there is time to do these things, because permission is powerful. And leadership needed to understand that it was important that we expressly share that permission and we make that part of the follow-up. Leadership isn't just coming in and saying, go do it. Just, go do your professional development. How do we get leaders to genuinely facilitate growth? We know that folks do what their leaders ask them about. What do they talk about in their one-on-ones? What do they talk about in their team meetings? What are the questions that come up from the leaders? Those are the things that folks are going to go do, right? So how might we get leaders to add in an agenda item, add in questions about what are you working on in your development? What resources are you using? Where are you finding resources? And help leaders know where the resources are. And so then now we had our what? We're going to do a professional development week. Well, we don't know how to do that. We've never done it before. And so now it's time to use the design thinking framework again and ask for help, right? So we needed to find out who's already working on this in the organization, who's really good at this, who are our influencers, to start our influence campaign.
Thank you, Paul. And so that led to building the hype. How do we get people excited about this? And to Paul's point, we wanted to bring in different tiers. So we started with the top. On one end, Paul was gracious enough to reach out to some of his HR partners. We had the VP of talent development involved, and we just had kind of this express permission from our top level, the C-suite, while Kyle and I really focused on some more of those grassroots initiatives, some of those bottom up teams. So we kind of met in the middle, going from top down to bottom up. And then in the middle, we met with individual leaders and professional development champions to also help build this hype. So we were approaching this from all different levels to try to get a cohesive and holistic excitement built up. And that looked like, a few different strategies, including advertising in town halls, reaching out to individual leaders, people leaders, and just getting that excitement on a peer-to-peer level. Kyle, what am I missing?
Yep, and to kind of build off on that, just to kind of give you some more specific information. Like the reason why we wanted to do it this, like we wanted to do it this explicit way was because we really wanted to show that the learning and development, it didn't matter where it was coming from. It didn't matter if it was top down or bottom up. We wanted to give people legitimate agency to make choices towards their development and have not just like prescribed autonomy, but like truly genuine autonomy to choose A, if whether they wanted to engage with the content at all, and B, if they did, how could we give them a humble, diverse array of options so that they can really choose their development and where they want to go, and even get the space to help them figure that out in the first place, like what even development meant for them. And so in order to help build the hype too, we used a specific SharePoint. If you ever use Microsoft SharePoint or anything like that, that's how we built this specific site where the professional development week was housed. And so often that looked like sharing that link out with other influencers in your groups. So if you're thinking about potentially doing something like this, it's not just enough to build the week itself. You also have to build the fact that letting people know that it's there and letting them know that there is something available to them to be able to use. So for just as much work as we did to put into the week itself, we had to put just as much work, if not equally more work, into letting people know that this existed and that this was important enough for them to spend time on, which was a very it was a very humbling lesson and very powerful lesson at the same time. And it was just a solid experience to really get through and really work with our colleagues as close as we did to really make this as big of an effort as we could and try to get them to see from our lens like why it matters and why they should care about it.
And I'll just add to that too, that like we're about to get into the week itself, right? Professional Development Week, our first try at doing this, and what did it look like? And there's so much, I want to make sure that we stress there's so much importance on the lead up to this, right? The legwork that goes in front of it, the hype, the building of the champions, the building of getting people on board. The influence campaign is a really big part of this. We will get into what the week looked like and what our learnings, what were coming out of it. But again, back to our design thinking framework, that was our try. And we have to know that it's a process, and tell the story, because the whole thing starts over again. We got to get curious about what came out of it and what it looked like. So if we could get in, I know we're about to get into what the week itself looked like. We had content, we had presentations, we had workshops, we had all sorts of things, but really it was just a microcosm of what we were looking for from the greater cultural perspective. That 1 week really is how we would like each week to look, or each month to look, as a continuous process. So I want to make sure that I stress as we get into this is less about the week itself and more about the idea of creating a culture of habits and behaviors that are going to drive this type of success.
Absolutely. And keeping our users first and foremost. I mean, that they were the driving force behind all of this. So we wanted to, without getting too granular, we wanted to appeal to a number of learning styles, learning preferences. So we hosted a number of synchronous and asynchronous sessions, really just to try to break it down and give people as much opportunity as possible. We wanted to make this as accessible and approachable to give people a really good experience and a really good launch pad for their own learning and development journey. So we had SharePoint that had resources. We provided additional time for people to be intentional about their own learning and development through designated couple hours a week where they could just focus on themselves and what learning and development means to them. We also curated content and helped people connect to different learnings based on what they were hoping to bring, goals that they maybe identified themselves. We also reached out to leaders to really create space for individual conversations during one-on-ones, during small group check-ins, through team meetings. Professional development was the focus. again, it's not the end all be all. This week was a launching pad for professional development. And we really wanted to encourage conversations around the department on different levels.
Absolutely. And to really build on that too. So one of the things that I wanted to reemphasize, if you're going through and trying to build a professional development week as well, and you really want to get like as much leadership buy-in as possible, those leadership videos were a really, really good way to do it, because what that did is it gave leadership not only it humanized leadership in a beautiful way, and it also gave them they also gave their honest thoughts on what development meant to them, which is really, really nice from a top down point of view as well as bottom up, because it shows that you're really committed to, it shows that not only you're committed to defining what the development looks like, but you're also giving people a standard to strive for, or at least something to work with, so that if people are really confused about where they want to start, they don't have to start with nothing, which is extremely important, because for us and for myself personally, success looked like in the week itself was just getting past inertia. It was just getting past zero, from going to 0 to 1, where it was about just really trying to utilize these resources so that you were doing something. It didn't, and so that you didn't fall back. You didn't really fall back into a behavior where you weren't utilizing that professional development time. And the other thing that I really want to emphasize for the leaders in the room too is to really, really give the agency to the people when they want to take the time for professional development. Because as great as it is for organizations to tout that they want learning and development, it means something completely else when you have a formal protected structure in place that protects people's time to take for professional development. So we really wanted to make sure that in our town halls, in our leadership, and in our presentations, we wanted to really emphasize that the organization and the formal leadership want you to take time for professional development, so that not only is that time encouraged, but it's respected by having boundaries and the permission to do so. That I cannot say enough, because there's nothing like, it's one thing to go off and do this work on your own. It's another to have an organization have the care for you enough to give you that protected time to say, we truly support what you're doing. Please keep doing this. Please keep taking this time for yourself, because we know that you'll grow, and we know that we know that this will be a great experience for both of us, a mutual win for everyone across the board.
And we know it's a process. And so there's not a single week or a single initiative that's going to make this happen. We did this back in the early part of the year, and we're still talking about it. And we're looking ahead to having professional development weeks happen in 2023 again, to continue the conversation, to continue to build the culture, to continue to ask for the tries, to get people on board, to start with our champions, and to start to win people over. We made attempts at reaching out to those that had their schedules done for them, to schedule extra time to do it, and it helped us amp up our own self-service resources. It helped expose some of the gaps that we had in what's available to folks to own their own development. So we upgraded our intranet page. We upgraded our resource library. We're continuing to upgrade and make more robust the available resources and spaces for folks to do this work amidst their workday, right? So this first try and this opportunity that you've given us to tell our story was really the spark that got us started on building this culture, and it does take time. We're getting into behavior and habit changes in the organization, not just from the individual, which we are placing the onus on them to own their own development, but on the organization and the systemic beliefs and the systems that are in place to have the shifts take place that allow for folks to lean into a growth mindset on the job.
So the learning, lot of learning from this, and hopefully where I think for all of you, if you want to attempt something as grand and as big as we did, hopefully the biggest things that you can learn from us on it is like the learnings that we got from what to do and what not to do, because there was certainly an abundance of feedback when it comes to that. So one of the things that we learned early on was to give people more than enough follow-up time. Just due to the nature of this having been our first try, we were not sure how much lead up time was truly necessary to actually really give like people enough time to get everything scheduled on their calendars, to go meet with the presenters, to like actually accept the presenters on their schedule, how much time we need to have the content in place, just being as humble and as real as possible for those that are interested. We found that in what we did, people needed more than 3 weeks in advance notice, at least for the jobs that we have as coaches, and for the people who were trying to serve, we needed to give at least a minimum 3 weeks advance notice. So hopefully with that specific feedback, a lot of you can, if you do try to do this, you can go back and at least give yourself that much time to bring to the table, so that you can work within those time constraints. That was probably one of the biggest pieces of the learning that we have. There's certainly others. If Paul and Kyle are more than welcome to speak to that as well. I don't want to take up the whole airtime.
I just want to reinforce that, this is our try, and we learned a lot from it, and that's really the ultimate goal, is to take something, even if it's not the end all be all, to take something, try it out, get feedback. What worked? What didn't work? What can we grow from? How can we come back even better and more in line with what our users are asking for? And that's the feedback that we're still building off of.
Yep, that effort is the key. So thank you. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts as we wrap up. I know that Kyle wants to share a quote with all of you, and then we'll see what your hot takes are.
Absolutely. So this is from one of my favorite authors in the world of psychology. His name is Dan Pink, fabulous author. And his quote is, "Human beings have an innate inner drive to be autonomous, self-determined, and connected to one another. When that drive is liberated, people achieve more and richer lives." And I couldn't agree more. And I hope that all of us in this space that are here to do the important work of learning and development, I hope that we can live up to that ideal, so that we can help liberate people to have their best work lives and best lives in general. All right. And then in terms of the follow-up, we do have some questions that we will show here in a second.
Yeah, and feel free to come off mute or post in the chat, but we're really interested in hearing what is your hot take? What are you getting from this? What are you hoping to try? What have you tried? So just opening it up to the chat.
Mm-hmm.
You can use the chat box as well. You can unmute yourself and speak as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what are you thinking about?
Very nice.
Yeah, what's on your mind? What are you thinking about?
We have one question, Kyle, from Kate. She asked, did you give permission in other ways?
Well, great question, Kate, and thank you for asking it. I would say that that's one of the reframings that we did, right? As part of our framework on design thinking is reframe problems, is reframing the idea of giving permission, right? That permission exists. And with that research, with that underlying belief in continuous learning being crucial to innovative thinking and creative problem solving, and being really driven in your mission-driven execution, that the permission exists, the belief that we're not allowed to learn on the job, the belief that we don't have permission to be in a learning zone or a growth zone at work. We're only supposed to be in performance mode. We're only supposed to do the things that we know how to do, that when you're working, when you're on the clock, so to speak, it's only supposed to be task driven, is a dysfunctional belief. And so one of the things that we do is we really lean into, rather than giving permission, helping leaders, helping individuals really shake off that limiting belief that they're not allowed. And as Kyle put in there, support people in giving themselves permission.
Because that was, for us, that was one of there was a predominant success. The two predominant success criteria was, how can we help people take the accountability, and how can we get them past zero? And this week was meant to give that type of that type of momentum to get that going, so that people can really get the feeling, that not just the feeling, but the reality that they are really in control of their professional development.
Okay, Matthew mentions one of the key takeaways for me is that we have understand the needs of the user to better build a sort of a tailored learning and development program or culture. Doing that ensures that everyone actually sees or experiences the benefits, and that makes it easier to bring them on board.
Absolutely. Great insight, Matthew. And that was part of our approach as well, is to help people see their own benefits of learning and development. And, I love that you used the word tailored. That's really what we were hoping to emphasize. And we wanted people to tailor sort of their own learning and development journey and pathway. And part of our work was just framing that, building that structure, building that foundation for people to take that and try, move in their own direction, see what works, see what sticks, and just know that they have the permission and the support for doing so. Thank you for adding that, Matthew.
Yeah. All right. And anything else before we end today's discussion?
Anyone else have any other questions, or they would like to share their views or the insights? Yes,
Yes,
we
I
have.
see Ramul. Yeah, growth mindset is the issue. Yeah, that idea of like knowing what to do and how to do it being the barrier to all the possibilities that are out there. Yes, it is the problem that we face, that we're looking to solve. It is the problem that needs that reframing that we talked about, and to try things. So I really hope that if there's anything that comes out of this for any of you, is to go try things out, make attempts. They're never going to be perfect. Failure is not a thing in this space. Fail is a first attempt in learning. We try things, and then we get curious all over again, and use that framework to keep at it, and to keep building the culture that we want, which is that reaching of leadership.
Mm. And if I want to add, if I would just want to add one more thing to that too, if we look at success and failure as spectrums more than like binary points, like 2 points on a scale, and we look at it like the spectrum in between each other, there's a lot of richness that comes from trying, because immediately it opens up to where you could have victories where you could have victories where you learn something, or you can have intentional, or you can have arenas where you can have intentional failure, so that you've used that and used the intention to learn something new. It's something that I've been having to learn too as we've been going into this. So kind of giving you like a more visceral example. So I typically look at my view of success as kind of like weightlifting. With the active exertion is only part of, and the breaking down of the muscle is only part of the actual like holistic process of building strength. The real strength comes from recovery, comes from thinking, comes from methodical thought, and getting the nutrients needed to actually grow for once the space is broken, for then the growth to fill it in. So if we look at it, so if you're looking at success and failure on that kind of spectrum, you can give yourself a lot of grace to really try something new and different when it comes to like figuring out what that next step looks like.
Well, you did it. Thank you all for your time. You did it. You took time out of your day to learn and grow and develop, right? And you still are going to get all your work done. So congratulations, and thanks for spending time with us.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you everyone for your kindness and your time.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot to all three of you for being our speakers today. And thank you everyone who all have taken your time and joined us today for the session and participating in the session with us. And we'll be sharing the recording of the session with all the participants who have registered with us, and we'll also upload the session to our APF YouTube channel. You can also watch it over there, and we'll also share a feedback form. Kindly do let us know your feedback on the session. Thank you so much. Thank you all once again, and meet you all in the next year 2023 for our next LLab session. Thank you so much.